Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Amanda Vinicky. We'll be joined by our Week in Review guests in just a moment. But first, some of today's top stories. Illinois legislators spent hours questioning the head of Illinois' embattled Department of Children and Family Services director. Earlier this month, DCFS social worker Deirdre Salas was killed when she made a visit to a home where children were believed to be in danger. Critics say field workers need more protection.
When our staff assess that there is a safety issue, they are able to contact law enforcement directly with the support of their supervisors to go to homes which they deem unsafe through our leads checks or through the background information we get from the homes that we are going into.
Judges recently held DCFS Director Mark Smith in contempt for violating the rights of wards of the state who were kept in a psychiatric facility months after they were cleared for discharge and placement with families. Smith says the agency's headcount is the highest it has been in a decade, but demands for services have also increased. He says in 2018, DCFS had roughly 16,600 kids in care. Now that number's over 21,000. Residents in Cook, DuPage, and Lake County zip codes ranked as the most socially vulnerable can receive free rapid COVID tests through a public-private partnership, Project Access COVID Tests, or Project ACT. The kits are first come, first serve, and are available at no shipping cost at accesscovidtests.org. Steady snowfall means some areas in and around Chicago are dealing with more than 9 inches on the ground. No more snow is expected through the weekend, but the National Weather Service expects the wind chill tomorrow to hit 9 below. But warming up on Sunday and early next week when temps could hit a relatively balmy 39 degrees. And the longtime owner of Arlington International Racecourse, Dick Duchossois, has died. He was 100 years old and had been battling health issues. The World War II veteran and founder of the Duchossois Group was a competitive businessman who poured his love of horse racing into Arlington. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Mike Mulligan of WSCR 670, The Score, Becky Vivi of WBEZ, Rachel Hinton of the Better Government Association, and Nader Issa of the Chicago Sun-Times. And let's get right to it. This week, all the leaders in the criminal justice system and city addressed Chicago's violence and working together. Let's take a look.
The tragedies that we have seen during the course of this year and last and historically requires us to come together.
It is a unique opportunity for us to have a public showing of what happens behind the scenes.
We have a challenge. All of us, everyone. We must step up and meet that challenge.
We have to come together as a group, whether we want to or not.
First, let's take a bit of a tragic rewind. Another week of shootings and carjackings, including a shootout with police on Lower Wacker Drive, and then, of course, the killing of 8-year-old Melissa Ortega in Little Village. Violence and shootings have become customary, but Rachel, is this week different somehow? Why are we seeing this united front from political leaders today?
I think it's the beginning of a new year, and I think that all three of them, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx, as well as CPD Superintendent Brown, have all wanted to address crime. We're seeing them come together after the death of this 8-year-old girl in Little Village because this is a moment for unity, but I don't necessarily think that it'll mean a change in the politicking that goes on behind the scenes. Obviously, Mayor Lori Lightfoot and Superintendent David Brown have been very critical of the Cook County criminal justice reforms that have been put into place, but I think that they see this as a moment of unity. All three of them are very important to addressing the crime surge that we're seeing. And so I think that they came together during this moment to show that a united front, and also, hopefully from here to have some sort of conversations that will begin to pave the way to hopefully seeing a reduction in crime in the city.
Becky, let's toss this to you. Chief Judge Evans says we have to come together whether we want to or not. Do these leaders want to come together, or are political feuds and futures plus policy differences just too wide a schism?
Well, I think Rachel hit it on the head saying it's a new year. It's also an election year. So we are going to see these Kim Foxx up for re-election and Mayor Lori Lightfoot following in 2023. They're both going to get, kind of, torn apart by their challengers. And so you're going to need, I think getting into disagreements with each other is not necessarily something that would help them in an election year either. So, we'll see what comes of it. They also need to show some progress this year over last year, because last year's crime numbers were, once in a generation record highs. And so we need to see, I think they all have some incentive to really crack down and make progress this year when it relates to crime.
Mike, it's an interesting question. Are they better served getting along or opposing one another when, as Becky points out, it is an election year? What's better off?
Well, there's so much dysfunction among the key people in the city, and the city itself feels broken, and it feels like things are getting worse. So I think from an appearance sake, it looks better if they're together. It looks better if people try to put whatever grievances they have aside. I don't know that there's great sincerity behind it, and I don't know that it's going to bail anyone out come election time. But I do think that part of the dysfunction is these interpersonal relationships, which seem broken as much as the city.
Yeah, Nader Ortega's mom says the system failed her daughter, as well as her daughter's alleged teen murderer. What can be done, even if these leaders were to get along? Where are we at that something can happen that will save the life of a young 8-year-old?
Well, it takes a lot. There's no one solution. I mean, everything that activists have talked about, you talked about investing in communities, investing in schools, investing in job opportunities, investing in mental health clinics, all of those things that help heal a community and rebuild a community. That's what it takes to stop violence. I mean, when we talk about violence and we talk about policing, typically policing is coming after the fact, right? A crime is happening and they're trying to solve it and find who did it. We keep seeing more police officers added and crime is going up and up. So that certainly hasn't helped. And I mean, we talk about these relationships. To be able to get some of those comprehensive solutions done together, you need leaders to work together. And I mean, they came together at this press conference, but then one of the seeds that Mayor Lightfoot has planted a few months ago about a lot of offenders on electronic monitoring, on house arrest, then going and committing new crimes. You saw that start to creep up on social media and saying this 16-year-old gunman was on electronic monitoring, which turned out not to be true. And so you start to have these little problems that fester and prevent any solutions from coming together.
And actually, I would like to quickly go around each of you as this notion of electronic monitoring comes up. You had Chief Judge Tim Evans really doubling down on his approach to the criminal justice system under accusations that the judicial system has been too lenient. He says there's no cutoff for trying to rehabilitate a youth who has gotten in trouble. Is Mayor Lori Lightfoot the one who is most going to wear the blame for this? Or is it Foxx, Evans, someone else? Could we quick go around? Is it Lightfoot? Mike, start with you.
I think that Evans kind of misspoke today, right? Didn't he talk about the 16-year-olds aren't able to determine whether, and that I saw that there was a huge pushback on that. So, I think they're each going to take their turn as we go through this election cycle.
Rachel?
I think it depends on the challenger. I think in the right hands of, an intelligent challenger, someone who's politically savvy, this could be something that each of them have to pay for, or not each, but Mayor Lori Lightfoot, Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx, especially, I think those two will have to reckon with or be made to reckon with the crime that we're seeing, especially the surge. I think, Superintendent David Brown has to reckon with it a little bit less, but I think, let's say if Mayor Lori Lightfoot doesn't get reelected reelected to another term, maybe he'll be booted from office, and whoever the next mayor is will point to this crime surge as a reason for getting rid of him.
You know, and actually, to that end, let's move on. I'm going to skip you, Nader and Becky. But Becky, I'll stick with you on a different political question. When a congressional seat opens up for the first time in 30 years, you know, why not take a stab at filling it? The race to replace 15-term Congressman Bobby Rush is getting more crowded by the day. Now it seems Jesse Jackson's son, Jonathan, is on the verge of joining the field. Becky, is he the automatic front runner?
Well, it's interesting because Rush has already made an endorsement of Karen Norrington-Reeves, who's kind of a, you know, not many people know her name. And then you have Alderwoman Pat Dowell, who, you know, left the Secretary of State's race and has racked up a lot of endorsements as well. So I don't think Jonathan Jackson is the foregone front runner. He certainly has probably the best name recognition of those three that I just tossed out, but certainly there's others that are throwing their names in the ring, and we won't really know until, you know, filing deadlines come and who's going to actually end up on that ballot. And obviously watching their campaign accounts will be something to look for as well, because that's a big race and you got to have big money if you're going to get the votes.
Well, and then Rachel, he's got the name recognition of his father, but also might he be hindered at all by Jesse Jackson Jr., who of course resigned in disgrace, went to prison for fraud when he was serving as congressman? Or is it not fair to link them?
I think that he'll probably face questions about that. I don't know that it's fair to link them. He's not the one who faced fraud allegations. He's not the one who's gone to jail or, you know, faced other penalties or things of that sort. So I don't think that it's necessarily fair to link them or fair that he faces questions about that. I think that he stands on his own 2 feet. He stands on his own merits, his own background, and he should be really questioned hard about that. I don't think that he should just get to sail into office just because of who his father is.
Now, returning a moment to talking about violence as we also stay on elections, but moving to the top of the ticket, Republican candidates for governor, Richard Irvin, also Jesse Sullivan, are both out with tough on crime ads. Mike, is this going to be the theme through 2022, particularly in the governor's race?
Boy, you know, what's amazing about it is how much money is being thrown at this. I mean, it is, I understand we've got billionaire after billionaire being governor. So we know that there's going to be nothing but these kinds of ads. But I have already been taken aback by how many ads I've already seen. I think it's you know, the deep pockets are going to make whatever issue they feel is making them electable the one they try to concentrate on.
Money, money, money in politics always. Now, another race, jumping ahead to 2023 a little bit, is, of course, the race for mayor. And Arnie Duncan made headlines this week with a speech that seemingly slammed Mayor Lightfoot's approach to crime. Now, Becky, is this a soft launch by Arnie Duncan for a bid to run against Lightfoot?
Well, you know, he keeps saying that he's seriously thinking about it. I think at this point it does seem, you know, likely that he, you know, will get into this race. And his experience at the nonprofit he's been working at is all related to crime. And to kind of get back to your last question, I think crime is not only going to color the governor's race, it's definitely going to color the mayor's race. And I think that, you know, Arnie Duncan came out swinging this week, really to take her to task on those numbers from last year where we ended with homicides and shootings. And I do think that, you know, the voters will divide on very different views of this. You know, you'll have people who really want to be tough on crime. You'll have folks who want to defund the police. You know, Lightfoot shot back trying to paint Arnie Duncan's whole suggestion as defunding the police. And so it's going to be very interesting to watch that campaign and the race for mayor play out as it relates to the broader issues with crime and the governor's race as well.
Yeah, I don't know about you. Handling all of these races all at once, and we're going to get to more in just a bit. Now, Nader, Duncan may be a familiar name to Chicagoans because, of course, he previously served as CEO of CPS. So How is that significant?
Well, he served as CEO of CPS and then, of course, went on to be President Obama's education secretary. And so he has experience in the city. He has that national profile that he can back his campaign up with. I think if you're talking about challenging Mayor Lightfoot, he's going to say, I have the authority on schools. The schools have been a mess under your 3 years, under your 3.5 years at that point in the campaign. And I know how best to run the schools. Now, if we talk about other challengers who might come in, who might care about schools, I think they're going to have an issue with Arne Duncan saying he knows what's best for CPS. There were obviously a ton of school closures in Black and brown communities when he was the CEO, and he was seen as part of the sort of ed reform or corporate public school reform movement. And he's not very well liked among progressives and public education advocates. And so, that's going to be a tough sell for a lot of people who sort of follow the schools closely.
And Nader, you led me right to the next question that I wanted to get to, and that's, of course, another big name in Chicago schools and another possible contender for mayor, and that's Chicago Teachers Union VP Stacey Davis Gates. She, however, first, as well as CTU President Jesse Sharkey, are facing an intra-union challenge. Rachel, are they vulnerable?
I think in some ways, yes. I mean, we're so far out from this election that, like, anybody can be vulnerable in the right hands and the right. If you get the right challenger with the right messaging, with the right team, yes, of course they can be vulnerable. But I think for the most part, Stacey Davis Gates and Jesse Sharkey are mostly popular within the union's ranks. So I think that they'll be okay. But I mean, anything is possible. We have to wait and see. We have to see who's going to emerge. Obviously, there's a ticket out, I believe, Teachers First or something first. I don't know the actual name. We have to see how that ticket is going to flesh itself out and what beyond, being against striking, they're going to make an issue. I think depending on what they decide their ticket or their campaign messaging includes, we could see an issue for both.
Nader, this is your beat. What do you think about what is going on with the Chicago Teachers Union? You have a contingency that says they're really dissatisfied, particularly about spending by CTU leadership and also the outcome of this work stoppage that led students, and a battle, frankly, with the mayor that led students to be out of school for 4 days.
So Rachel is right. It is something first. The group's called Members First. They've been around for a little while. They have run against this sort of Jesse Sharkey, Stacey Davis Gates caucus in CTU. It's called CORE. It was first around when Karen Lewis, the CTU president, about a decade ago, came into CTU leadership. Members First, what their agenda is what's in the name. We want to put members first. We want to fight for pay and benefits. And what CORE fights for, Stacey Davis Gates and Jesse Sharkey and Karen Lewis before them, they are fighting for some of these wraparound issues that we've seen come up in the past few years. And so the number of nurses in schools, social workers, librarians, class sizes, now these past couple of years, safety during COVID. That's what they're focused on. The other group is focused on pay and benefits, generally speaking. They lost the last election to Jesse and Stacey. They're not a new group. It's not this new uprising that the CTU leadership is facing. In any election, there are going to be at least two tickets who are duking it out. Obviously, this past dust-up with Mayor Lightfoot, there were some more members than usual who weren't very happy with CTU leadership. But we'll see. I don't know that the people who are unhappy with leadership are necessarily going to be voting with members first, because the unhappiness was for very different reasons.
Got it. And Nader, I know you had a piece looking at what is lying ahead for CPS as well as for CTU, is that constant facing off. But let's move this to COVID in schools. Vaccination rates are improving, but they're still disparate. What is the district doing about that? And is a vaccine mandate for schools realistic? Becky.
Well, I think it's very realistic, and there's precedent that there are all kinds of vaccines that children have to get before they enter school all over the country. And so the vaccines would have to be formally approved for them to actually implement a mandate. They can't mandate something under EUA, or there's not much precedent for that. But it's looking like these will be formally approved for children 5 to 11, which would encompass the entire school age population. So it's quite realistic. The question is, does that add any fuel to the fire in terms of, again, being an election year? And we'll see. But I do think, vaccinations in schools are slowly improving, the vaccination rates. Some schools are still very, very, very low. But, I did a little check for myself. I went back to the adult vaccination rollout, and 2 months in, maybe 5% of the city was fully vaccinated. And, we're already to a third of the CPS population 2 months into the 5 to 11 age group. So I think, give it a little more time. I suppose we'll see where we land. I have heard from, doctors and school-based health providers that there was a slight actual surge in people interested in getting vaccinated when Omicron came around. So we have more people willing to get vaccinated during this latest surge. So, we'll see where we get come next summer and next fall for the next school year.
So much at play here, right? With the notion of availability of vaccines and that, Hunger Games-esque race to try to get one in some corners, but then also, of course, vaccine hesitancy. And there are fewer places to get tested in Chicago now. So, Rachel, given that Chicago Center for COVID Controls shuttered, seemingly results that were untrustworthy anyway, and then other local testing companies also under investigation, how does something like this happening? They're receiving government money.
Yeah, that's, I think, what many people are trying to find out. Obviously, Black Club Chicago has been all over this. Kelly Bauer, hat tip to her. She's been breaking story after story on these organizations that get federal dollars, how they're basically scammers. I think that is the next story we're waiting for, the next thing we're waiting for. How did this happen? We're so far along in this pandemic. We're so far along in testing and masks and so on and so forth. I think that's the question many people are trying to figure out now when they see these things, is how did this happen? What is still going wrong in our COVID response that something like this can happen?
I've been wondering some about the challenge of government needing to move faster than it typically does, aka at a snail's pace, to address a pandemic. And then at the same time, you see these issues pop up with a rush of spending. Now, let's move on to brighter topics. At least Bears fans hope so. This week was the anniversary of the great win of '85, that Super Bowl shuffle. And the team now has a new GM and a head coach. So, Mike, did the McCaskies do well with this shuffle at the top?
It felt as if any kind of change would be an improvement, quite frankly. So I think they had gotten to a point where Ryan and Matt weren't working out, so they hired now a new Ryan and Matt. So God bless them. They got Ryan Poles as the general manager. They brought in a really bright young guy, 36 years old. Of course, Pace was 37 when he was hired, and they gave him 7 years. Hopefully this will happen a lot quicker. And they hired Matt Eberflus. It's kind of a little against the grain of a hire because everyone's going for these offensive guys in the NFL, and he was the defensive coordinator in Indianapolis. So it will be really interesting. They're not introducing either guy, and I believe Poles was hired on Tuesday. They will do that on Monday. They've got an 11 a.m. News conference scheduled, and that's when they're going to unveil those guys, probably because they're doing a lot of finishing touches. They're trying to get the staff together. Everyone wants to know who's going to be the offensive coordinator. That's the biggest question, and everybody wants to know who's going to work with the quarterback. So it's a little unusual to get the defensive-minded guy in the modern NFL, the 4 teams that are remaining, all offensive guru-driven. So it'll be interesting to see the name they land on as their offensive coordinator. We've heard 4 or 5 different names. The Packers quarterbacks coach, they're supposedly talking to him. His name is Luke Getsy, and he was a guy that interviewed for a head coaching job in Denver. And the thinking is that he might be willing. They hired Nathaniel Hackett, who was the the offensive coordinator from Green Bay, and they're thinking that Getsy wants to come to Chicago as a coordinator because he gets to call plays, because Matt LaFleur does that in Wisconsin. So we'll see who they wind up with, but I think there's reason for optimism. I just think Bears fans are exhausted by going through these process. They had 16 different general managers zoom in and 12 coaches. It's just a lot of people to filter through before they landed with these two guys.
And Bears fans are ready for it. And meanwhile, of course, you got the Bulls charging ahead, if you will, with what DeMar DeRozan making it to the All-Star team. So with that, we're out of time. Thank you so much to Mike Mulligan, Becky Vivi, Rachel Hinton, and Nader Issa. That is our show for this Friday night. Don't forget, you can get Chicago Tonight and the Weekend Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. We're back at 7 o'clock next week. And now for the Weekend Review, I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe. Have a great weekend. Good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford